Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 92. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode. I'm out on my travels again for this, the podcast series surrounding the histories of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects, and I'm delighted to say that I've ended up at a brewery. Now, Northamptonshire has quite a number of breweries, but this one has 200 and very nearly 25 years to its name. So it's quite a milestone that this particular brewery will be marking during the course of the exhibition at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery. If I look at the glass in front of me, and yes, there is something in it, it says, "A pint of history in your hand." Who better to tell me more about that history than the gentleman who is in front of me? Hello, who are you?
Well, I'm Alaric Neville, and for a short while longer I'm the Managing Director of Phipps NBC.
Phipps NBC. The object that is in the exhibition carries the name of Phipps NBC, but if you look at it very closely, Phipps and NBC look very different, and there's a reason for that.
Yes, the object would originally have been designed by NBC, the Northampton Brewery Company, and that was their logo from the late 19th century right through to the merger in 1957. And Phipps was the larger partner, but their logo at the time was just the county crest or the town crest. So they used the star and added their name above it. So it's a hybrid, a genuine hybrid, or repurposing.
Is there a particular reason for the six-pointed star?
It was the Phipps brothers used it because what we would call Burton ales or sparkling beer or pale ales, beer that you could see through rather than the dark stouts and the milds that you couldn't, sort of became en vogue in the middle of the 19th century. And this is the era when most of the population may not have read and may not have been able to read what it was. So you had various companies adding symbols to their beers. For instance, Double Diamond is a pale ale and Phipps had Diamond Ale. So NBC had Sparkling Star and their beers were called Star, Black Star, Red Star, various star names. So that hinted at what you were getting.
So why have we got two brewery names in one?
Well, the two breweries grew up side by side. Phipps is the older by 50 years or more, but NBC was the new upcomers. They actually came from Coventry, and before that, Burton, the family that ran them, were called the Phillipses. And they came in with the new sparkling Burton ales, and Phipps before that had mainly brewed dark, heavy beers. And all of a sudden, they were the new kids on the block. They were the hip kids. So Phipps changed and gradually rebuilt their brewery to do the thing. And they coexisted for, I guess, almost 100 years together. Fierce competitors. To some extent, they loathed each other. The higher management and the owners of each company were at each other's throats. But they saw the writing on the wall in the 1950s, and they realised they had to merge to fight off, or hope to fight off, the national companies that were buying up.
What was the consumption of beer like in those days? How important was beer to the community?
Beer was much more a foodstuff then. Going back into the 19th century when water came from wells and pumps, beer was a safe, reliable source of liquid. So you had family beer, table beer, very weak beer, small beer. All of these beers are really just well under 2%, some of them 2.5%. So children would have them because they were safe and wholesome things. The beer, the liquid had been boiled, so cholera carrying germs had been dispensed with. But then into the 19th century and into the 20th century, beer was still something that people had at dinner time, and then they went back to work.
What was the standing of Phipps NBC in the town at its height?
Phipps, as a family concern, had its tentacles in many things. I mean, they had Phipps and Sons that were shoe mercers, which is where the Derngate is. So they made all the various bits and bobs that went into shoes. They never made shoes. They had the ironworks, they owned Hunsbury Hill. They had the model farm in Hunsbury, where they bred Shire horses. They were property developers. They developed what we now know as Phippsville, and they did other things in the town, and they were very much involved in the cricket club and the cobblers. And that's why they play in claret, partly. because that's the Phipps colour. NBC were a much more sort of sleek, well-designed brewer. They were about pubs and the beer. Phipps was considered slightly the more country, bucolic company. It had started in Toaster, and its beers were more floral and golden, certainly in the 19th century in IPA. NBC was the working man's pint. It was the best bitter, so we still produce Red Star, which is the best bitter from NBC, sorry.
Clearly, Phipps, it was one of the shapers of the town. It had a significant impact on Northampton.
Yeah, and Northamptonshire, in the sense that they retained the Toaster Brewery and some properties in Toaster until just into this century. They provided MPs, they provided mayors, aldermen. Alongside the shoe factory giants, they were pretty much people you didn't cross, I think. Certainly our illustrious chairman, Pickering Phipps II, was known to be a man whose business practices you wouldn't want to mess with. He had his own ways of dealing with troublesome landlords, which we don't. We're nice.
I mentioned that you've got 2.25 centuries worth of history, or will have by the time the exhibition comes to an end. What happened to the business? Because there was a time when Phipps NBC vanished. It was bought out by a bigger player still.
Watney's took Phipps over in 1960, a hostile takeover, I would add. They made great promises, like people often do when they take over a business, about independence and maintaining the local traditions. And within 13 years, they got rid of all the local brews. They'd rebranded themselves Watney Man Midland. And then eventually they did a joint venture with Carlsberg, so the brewery became Carlsberg's that we know today. The company continued as a pub chain, and it drifted on under various owners until my brother and I picked the company up because he was working for Scottish and Newcastle, the last strands of the company that had been Phipps. And we changed tack at that point, decided to bring the brewery back because that seemed to be fun.
Was that the sole reason for doing it? Because in the process, you brought back some of the town and, by extension, some of the county's heritage as well. We are sitting inside the Albion Brewery, which has got a bar on the front of it, and the noises of industry, as you were hearing earlier on, are actually brewing going on. We're directly over the top of what is the King's Well of Kingswell Street.
Yeah. It happened in stages, in the sense that the original idea to bring Phipps back was done within Scottish and Newcastle. They were going to bring it back and put it into the local pubs because they realised at that point there was a market for a little bit of history. And then they got into trouble, and I was brought on board to try and do the historical research for the brew. So for a very small time, I was on S&N's payroll, if you like. And when that all went down the toilet, my brother and I, who are both from Northamptonshire, family going back many generations, we felt it was a shame. And the work had been done. We'd met the old brewers. We'd got the recipes. We knew it could be done. It hadn't been done. So we got hold of the company. My brother managed to sort of wheedle it out of the hands of the executors of Scottish and Newcastle. And then we looked for a partner, and we were brewing in Oakham at Grain Store because the head brewer there had been trained by the last great Phipps head brewer, so we had that connection. And it went very well. And then we had the idea to move it back to Northampton. It sort of grew exponentially. None of us set out. I didn't set out to run a brewery. I was happy being a sound engineer. But when this building came on the market, it became empty. It's just like the stars aligned and fate aligned. And we both thought, we can make this the proper revival that we'd sort of dreamed of. The flame never died. And when we started brewing it back, the consultant head brewer was a guy called Pat Heron, who started at Phipps in 1953, I think. That knowledge was still there when we were looking for it. It was still alive. We had 6 or 7 old Phipps gentlemen. I believe all but one of them have now passed on. So we did it just in time to give that authenticity.
So, Alaric, are you a historian? Because you seem to be the custody of a very important part of Northampton and Northamptonshire's heritage and history in the process of bringing it back to life now.
My father was a university lecturer, and he was passionate about history and Northampton and Northamptonshire in particular. So I grew up in a house where that mattered. We went on archaeological digs as kids, that sort of thing. I did a fine art degree and art history, and I finished it, and I went to work for Northamptonshire County Archaeology Department. We dug Stanwick Villa and Far Cotton at that time. And then I gave it up for the bright lights of the music industry. But history, local history, has always seemed to me to be very important. And when I meet someone for whom it isn't, I always find it strange that people, you don't care where you come from, you don't care about the place you come from and why that's there and why that's called that. So I cared about Phipps. I cared about the name and I cared about Northamptonshire.
And why should let's call it the logo, why should the six-pointed star of Phipps NBC be in the exhibition? What does it say about Northamptonshire if people were looking in on Northamptonshire?
It's as Northamptonshire a product as you can get. I think it was actually made in Far Cotton. NBC and Phipps are represented in it. As a child, I remember seeing it that it would have faded away in the late 60s and it would be removed and the Watney's Red Barrel would have replaced it. But here and there, you would still see it. I think it's a very attractive design. I remember at art school being really attracted to those signs that you saw on the end of walls that were fading away. You often saw the Phipps star coming through, or the NBC star. We all hear about the shoe industry, quite rightly. But brewing was a big thing, and Phipps NBC was a big part of Northamptonshire. It became the last surviving brewer around here. It's local character you can drink.
And on that note, Alaric, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for speaking to me today, and I suppose the only other thing to say is cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.